Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and I'm joined today by Jamie Hopkins, a managing partner at Carson Group, co-host of the excellent Framework podcast, and co-author of the new book, Find Your Freedom, Financial Planning for a Life on Purpose, which recently gained bestseller status. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Daniel, thanks for having me on, my friend.
Joining us from Seattle,
Yeah.
PA, right?
Yeah, the true grunge city of the world, and out here at FPA Annual. But talk about Framework. We're shooting 17 episodes out here in 3 days, which is nice and easy.
Well, you're making. I think I'm shooting 6 episodes at Orion Ascent in February, and I was complaining about that, and I won't complain anymore. But I'll keep it. I'll keep you in mind next time I want to complain.
You're allowed to have your own complaints, man. You don't have to base them off of me. That's
perfect. All right, man. Well, hey, listen. As a fellow author, I know that the process of writing a book is difficult. I know it's time consuming. I know that it pays horribly. And the only reason anyone would ever do it is that they have something important to say. What led you down the crazy path of writing another book, and what was the message of this book that you hadn't shared before?
Yeah. So, talking about your books too, Robert Van Beck, I just interviewed. So I think he actually translated one of your books, right?
Translated my book to Dutch.
Yeah, Dutch. He is a fellow Dutch, Netherlandian. We were just talking about, soccer teams and everything too. So that was nice. When it comes to books, I've written, 7 books in some shape or another. Now I have 3 textbooks, 2 ebooks for Forbes, Rewirement, and then Find Your Freedom. Find Your Freedom came about in a slightly different way than all the other ones. They all have their own story. And this one was actually, I was talking to a reporter about a year ago, and they asked me for my favorite financial planning books. And I paused for a second and was like, and I was trying to think through the books I like. And, I think yours was in there, and the one from Brad Klontz was in there. And I was kind of like, these are all behavioral books or investment books, right? There's good, and there's good retirement books too. There's niche areas, there's good real estate. There's some good insurance books. Wade's got a great insurance book. And then I was kind of but there's not really a great financial planning book that everyone goes to. Even the ones that Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Millionaire Next Door, How I Invest My Money, they tend to be investment related books. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to write a planning book. And then I had the theory that there's one of two things. Either one, financial planning is generally still a new profession. So obviously there's more investment books, and we just haven't gotten around to really putting a good one down, or nobody wants to read a planning book. And hence that's why we don't have one that could come up to my mind.
Yeah.
So I started down that path and actually wrote maybe a half of it and scrapped the whole first half. So I didn't use anything from it. It's all gone, and I wrote half a book and scrapped it, and then restarted with this one. And actually focused the whole first side on this idea of defining what freedom means to you and going beyond goals to aspirations, and then tied in financial planning on the back half of one of the tools that can help you get there for the financial freedom part of it. So that's really the message, is that we need to look at life less so from the investments or the strategies or the planning, and purposely put that the second half and said, look, if you can't figure out what's going to make you happy in life and where you want to be, the things you enjoy doing, all the planning and investments and strategies are all kind of meaningless, right? If you just end up as a super rich, super unhappy person, we all failed you.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, I had a physical pain reaction to talking about writing half a book and throwing it away. But indeed, learning to curate and learning to edit is one of the most important and hardest things about writing a book. So it's a testament to your process that you would go through all that pain and then throw it away But I mean, it's a testament to what a unique book and what a good book it is. I think the listeners will get an idea of how different it is. You talk about things like fun, happiness, community, not always a part of most of these investment books that we think about. So I think it's fulfilling a real niche. Let's start at the beginning, though. You talk in the book about your money story.
Mm-hmm.
You stress the importance of understanding our own money scripts, our own money stories. If you don't mind, could you tell us a bit about your story, and then share broadly why you think it's a valuable principle that we understand our own money stories?
Yeah, and I'll give, a couple of people thanks on this too. I mean, some of your work on it. I mentioned Dr. Brad Klontz, Dr. Joy Leary, also somebody is great, and I've had meaningful conversations around this area with. And this is one, I think, the more time you spend in this profession and working in finance, the more important you realize not just like your own money story, but probably your parents, your grandparents, your community, the environment around you has an impact on it. And so, I explored like one piece of it in the book. And up until about 3 years ago, I really didn't talk about this out loud. And one, I thought like nobody wanted to hear it. And then two, it was like, well, are you just going to get upset? And then you can't continue on and whatever else you have to do after that story. And you just like cry on stage. And then it gets awkward because you don't move to the next slide. And they're like, what's happening?
What's up, Jamie?
Yeah. Well, it's more like, what's wrong with them right now? There's lots of things wrong with them. But yeah, the story that I tell is like my family one about my dad is the biggest one. That's probably the most formative to my, life path and journey, which is, I grew up in Baltimore. I'll just tell a longer version of it, but I grew up in Baltimore, and neither my dad or mom graduated from college, and they, essentially had their own, they were solopreneurs, husband-wife team, and ran a construction company where all like roofing based, high up on ladders, so roofing, gutters, fascia, soffit, anything like that. And my mom kind of ran the books and set appointments, those types of things. And my dad went out and hung gutters and did the work. And, there was a day that he went out and I had said bye to him in the morning and, all of those things. And it wasn't a great weather day, kind of raining and things like that. And he was finishing up the last job of the day that he was on, and it came down the aluminum ladder, and they freeze over faster than a roof does, right? And slipped and fell and was gone. And I actually cut some of this out in the book. I've had some people tell me I should have kept more. And you also don't try to depress people, but there's parts of that are, super formative to me that I didn't add to, which was, then I remember my aunt grabbing me at school and saying, oh, your dad's been in an accident. Well, I'm 8 years old. So really what an accident means to me at that point is a car accident. And I remember being at home when I saw the gutter truck, the box truck come back in, and I was like, oh, the truck's fine. Like, dad's probably fine. But then, like, kind of when I went downstairs, I don't ever remember being told that my dad was gone, but, went downstairs and you could just kind of tell, right? Yeah. So then all of a sudden, we went to school that morning with a dad who's the breadwinner of the family, and ended the day without a dad and without somebody earning money for the family. And, that obviously put a lot of stress on my mom, who, is an amazing human and kind of one of my heroes. And she, eventually just woke up one day and said, you have to move forward and figure out how to, provide for the family. She actually still runs that company today. So she's kept that going for 30 some years, and which is just beyond amazing. And I kind of talk about some of the trauma around money and those type of struggles. And some of the things, like, I don't remember even if I put this in the book, but I know I talk about it sometimes, which is like, I remember, us getting by on like the Social Security checks, but you didn't know at the time that like Social Security, like 8-year-olds don't know that Social Security checks show up to, for deceased, family members with kids and the spouses with under 18 kids. And later on, you study the world of Social Security, and you're like, oh, so that's where those checks came from. Like, it was Social Security, like widow's checks and beneficiary checks. And you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, I learned that later on. And so that's part of my story. And I think that that's just then formative to like, so how do you make some of your own decisions, and what trauma or abundance or scarcity do you carry with you moving into life? And some of those might be really good. Like, you persevered through things, and so you've built resiliency and a drive. And some other ones, like, you might have negative reactions to things that you need to work on, But if you're unaware of them, it's very hard to work on them. And I think that's part of the story is, it's okay wherever you are, but to kind of understand how you got there, I think is very important.
Now, well, first of all, thank you for your willingness to share that story here and certainly in the book. When I think about you and your work ethic, and there's sort of two things that come to mind. First of all, you're one of the best educated people in the industry. I mean, you've got lots of letters after your name. And then the second thing I think of is just an intense work ethic, like just, working smart and working hard. A lot of folks do one or the other. You do both. When you look back at your dad's passing and this whole story, where did those two things fit? I mean, was this a conscious or sort of an unconscious thing to say, I'm not going to work with my hands, I'm going to get a lot of education and do stuff that's safer? Talk to me about that.
So not at all on the safer route. So I did hang gutters and do that during summer. So that's what I did growing up. And I actually love that stuff. So I've renovated 2 houses now. And I'll say that I don't know that I will be able to keep a marriage through a 3rd renovation of a house. So I think that the time of me renovating houses has come to an end, at least for now. But I will say Dr. David Roney will ping me every once in a while when he sees a property in Philly. And he's like, you could fix this one up. And I have been driven by a couple. But so I actually love that work. And I probably grew up in it. My uncles, grandparents, they were all in the construction world. And so it feels like a part of me to be handy and build things. But I would say my mom was more on that side. She didn't want me to be in that, that profession, if you want to say, industry of construction. She wanted us to go to school and be able to do something that was less dangerous and, probably more fulfilling long-term, could provide, more safety financially and security for a family. So that was definitely my mom's. The hard work probably emulated a little bit of her. I would also say, though, growing up, the educated part, that ties back to this too. I wasn't a great student or super, so a lot of people always say, oh, you're super smart and that must have come naturally. I wasn't great at school growing up. It was a struggle. By the time I got to college, I mean, I grew up in Baltimore, born in Baltimore City Hospital. I hadn't written a paper by the time I got to college. The very first paper I wrote, my professor in humanities, actually, this was just kind of a jerk move, but I went into his office and I guess it was so bad. He's like, I don't have any edits for this. And he literally crumpled it up into a ball and dropped it in the trash can and said, start over. So when you say about having to restart the book from scratch, that was my very first paper I ever wrote. And that was tough because I left there being but that's as good as I could do right now, right? So I do need help. I have no idea how to do a better version of that. I've never done one. So that was not the best approach to help a student along. So having them been a professor now for 12 years, I would never do that to somebody because it's not helpful, right? So then my 2 best friends, basically it probably counts as plagiarism or whatever. They basically helped me write that first paper. I had no idea, and they just sat down with me, and I think I typed it, but I think a lot of their sentences just came out of my friend's mouth, write this, and I was like, okay, do. So those things kind of stuck with me, but I always viewed the work hard as a way to overcome some of those things I didn't feel like I naturally had, or at least at that point, maybe I did, but I didn't have the experiences, to be able to write. And, everyone had taken AP classes. I had never taken an AP. I remember people were I've got 17 credits. And I'm like, I don't know what an AP class is. I didn't have one of those. And so I felt like I was always kind of a little bit behind when I got to college, when I got to high school, when I got to law school. I felt the same way. But I felt like every time, by the time I left, I felt like I had caught up to everybody. Yeah.
So we know, when I think about my own family of origin and money stories, I see a lot of adoption, I guess, so acceptance of sort of the familial style. And then in other cases, I see, extreme pushback, 180-degree difference. I think a great example, my mom grew up in a house where my grandmother was extremely frugal, right? My grandmother grew up in the Depression, right? So that's her, that's her money story. And so my mom grew up in this house where even though they had money, they were very, very thrifty. And now we sort of have this joke about my mom that she just gets you whatever she gets you, it will be the best iteration of that thing. because it's like, this is my favorite story. I asked for a cast iron pan one time for Christmas, thinking it would be $20 because that's what most of them cost. She spent $350 on a pan, which I'm not even sure how you do that, right? But like, she got me some, cast iron pan from France. And I'm like, Mom, like, I just needed a thing to like cook eggs in. Like, what are we?
Yeah.
But it's this reaction against the way she was raised. She resented having off-brand stuff or sort of, used stuff. Is that pretty typical that either it's sort of a hard accept or a hard reject?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's probably some better research than me guessing on this. So I'll just have to do like my like disclaimer that this is anecdotal evidence and not research-backed evidence with any p-value of use. So I see variations of all of it, but you do see, you adopt or that acceptance mentality of family things, and that's your experiences can help. I don't think they define you, but they help mold and shape you. And then your environment has a big to do with it too. So, and some of that might not be conscious, but, if you were, grew up in an environment where you had money, but you couldn't spend it, that environment's almost like putting a limitation on you probably in your mind. So when you can remove that limitation, you probably do, right? You're like, hey, the environment has now shifted. I can remove that limitation. And so I think there are things like that where you see generations shift between frugal and spending because one is putting an environmental limitation on you. And then when that environmental limitation is removed, your behavior changes. And, like I have some of that too, to like your story is like, that's how my mom is. My mom is the gift giver who always is buying more and more gifts. And my aunt was like that, who just passed away. Like when we went to her funeral stuff in the Netherlands, it was all about like her gifting and Christmas and how big of a deal. And every year she would say, I'm going to spend less money. And I don't think I actually got how close my mom and my aunt were with that. Like they're like identical. And I knew my grandmother was, but like all three of them and my other aunt, Anne, they all have adopted that. Well, now you take it one step down and like, I hate gifts. I don't like them. I think I even talked about this. I might have talked about this before with you, but I was like, a lot of stuff seems backwards to me. It doesn't even make sense. Like we give people birthday presents and I'm always like, there are some cultures that do this opposite and I like that better, but like the parents should get birthday presents. Like I didn't do anything. Like I just came into existence. It's not like, it's like, hey, Jamie, great job. It's your birthday. You did wonderful things being birthed. It's like, I didn't do anything. Like I don't deserve a gift for just coming into existence. Like my parents raised me and created me. Like they're actually the people that deserve a gift for that. And so I think there's things like that like just logically to me never make any sense. So I don't really like receiving gifts. It makes me feel awkward. And I don't love giving gifts. And I have tried though to be more cognizant of the fact that like not everybody likes the same gifts and that you have different love languages and different gifts resonate with different people. And I think that we've, especially in this country, have become too materialistic with our gift giving. Like when people talk about gifts, if you mention that, most people immediately think like a thing, like I'm going to hand you an iPhone and a tablet or like a book. But most gifts should be like, I think, non-material items. And it's how most people's like love languages are more like, time spent with somebody and time saving activities and experiences. And I think that we need to do a better job of being able to gift those to people. And some of those financially are actually good decisions because it allows us to space out the spend instead of lumping it all together, say in December, and then having a bill due January that we can't meet in January because of cash flow concerns. Then all of a sudden we're accumulating debt and we fall behind. So an example of that is like, instead of buying a spouse, like, so a new lawnmower or something, that you buy a lawn service that you just pay throughout the year. And actually, because you don't take on that debt and interest, that could become a more cost-effective way than like buying the item. And that's just a bigger example of one. But I don't think people think about like cash flow around holiday seasons because that's a really not fun topic to like think about, like cash flow versus just buying gifts. But it is, if you start diving into that, there's a lot of interesting nuances there that you could explore if you get a little more time to reflect on how you give to people.
How dare you question consumer culture with 11 days to go until Christmas? this is entirely consistent with the literature on spending and happiness, right? We know that spending and happiness, we know that we value experiences with people we love. We know we value getting out of work we dislike, with the lawn service. But I was going to tell people to gift your book as a perfect holiday gift, but now I know better.
No, I mean, I guess you could gift the audiobook because that's an experience, right? You just get to listen to me for 14 hours. I didn't say it was a good experience, so but it's an experience.
We're going to move on from your horrifying ideas about the evils of gift giving. No, we're going to move on to chapter 9, which I really love. It talked about the importance of investing in ourselves, which I think is perhaps the most critical and the most overlooked piece of financial advice that's out there. To your earlier point about sort of writing the financial planning book that you wish existed. Why do you think we're so quick to look outside ourselves instead of inside, right? There's so many books on maximizing returns, but there's so little conversation on maximizing the engine of our wealth.
Yeah, there's probably a great book to be written on maximizing human capital, but not with those terms, right? And as you said, because if you look at short term, and I think this is why, short term, we often have a more ability to impact like a quick investment, a quick spend, a quick buy, or a quick cutback in budgeting. Right. So those are all things that I can typically act on with a meaningful outcome immediately, even if the return's not there yet. But I've always looked at people buy stuff with an expected return. And so you think at the time of that purchase, you're getting that return. So when we invest, we don't actually think about the long-term return. We think about the expected return now. And so we believe we're buying that, right? If I go buy a really simple example, if I go buy a bond that's paying 4% coupon, I do expect this return based off of that, even though I don't get the return yet, right? So I've kind of bought the return. When it comes to ourselves, a lot of that I think is too far out. And there's probably too many variables to always figure out what the exact return is. Even talking about going to college, which I still believe is a huge and very important investment in ourselves, is very hard to qualify what that return is going to be monetarily. Even when you start looking at the research around going to college, it gets pretty nuanced, right? The college you go to matters. Whether you take out a lot of debt or a little debt's going to matter. I talk about this some in there too, picking the right major, taking out debt to be cut, to go into certain majors is a bad investment decision, and we
like psychology.
It's a terrible one. And then you go and you work at prisons and it's even worse. And then you want to leave and then you go, write books and play guitar, right? And it's was that a good investment? It was not specific to anybody, right?
Yeah.
By the way, that was a generic story that...
Sure. No resemblance to anyone living or dead. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can do much more micro things too. So it could be hiring a coach. It could be, doing a designation or an education program. They don't always have to have letters behind your name too. There's fantastic, introspective programs you can do out there and weekend things to learn more about yourself. And the other thing I do talk about in the book is not always focusing on improving weaknesses. I think that's a personal investment mistake that we make a lot, is that people say, hey, here's my greatest weakness. I'm going to spend all this money to improve it. And actually there's the research on that side suggests the opposite, that we just have this bias to believe that it's because something is weak that there's more room to go up. So therefore we should focus on that. But most of the stuff, there isn't a ceiling. So that notion of oh, I can improve it more just isn't true, right? It's an infinite ceiling. So you can't improve it more than the other one. And actually, we're probably better at our strengths. So I tend to use the football analogies there because most people in the U.S. understand football and know who Tom Brady is. And I'm always Tom Brady in the offseason doesn't go, I'm going to invest back in myself and learn how to tackle because I'm going to throw 12 picks this year. And it's possible that I might need to be able to tackle somebody. He doesn't even try to tackle people anymore. He just walks off the field after an interception, right? He's there's 10 other guys who are better at that. And so I'm not going to worry about it. No, what does he do? He focuses on throwing the ball. He focuses on studying film. So he invests back in himself every off season and gets better at his craft. but focuses on what he's good at and then delegates out the other responsibilities to people who are better at that. And so I think that as you get more nuanced into investing in yourself, it is start to invest in the things that you have the biggest impact in, and that's going to have your best return, not always chasing the things you're not good at.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom here. First of all, you got to get that educational base in place. But the research shows that after the sort of the fundamental educational hurdles have been cleared, it's really a lot more about EQ than IQ. And your interpersonal skills are going to make or break your rise to the top faster than your technical chops will. And that's, I think, a reality that some people have a hard time getting their arms around. It doesn't feel fair or something, but it it is what it is. And I like the piece about working on your strengths too. Just knowing that, knowing again your story, your money story, your personal story. There's probably things you're never going to do well. And I think Tom Brady and tackling is the perfect metaphor for that.
Yeah. Well, I think he said recently, he's like, I'm a really good athlete. I just can't run and jump. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. So there's another thing. So you talk about emotional intelligence. And, the other one that we talk about a lot is AQ, which is adaptability quotient. And I don't know that there's as much research on individuals there. I know that there's some. There's a lot on the business side of the world, which actually tends to a lot of business concepts do apply to individual behavior too, because businesses are just a bunch of individuals behaving, right? But if you look at, and that was a McKinsey study that showed that companies that reallocate budget, I think over 25% to new initiatives each year have more than 50% growth than the companies that don't reallocate budget every year. So and that's are you constantly adapting? And, you're keeping a core, but are you constantly adapting on the fringes of yourself to push and change and develop? You will grow more than those that kind of just stay true to the course that never moves. And so that's kind of pushes into that adaptability. Can you change? And I think it gets to grit too, right? Can you overcome things and keep pushing forward while adapting?
Yeah. Keeping somewhat on this theme of self-improvement and self-care, I think another place where your book adds some important new dialogue to the conversation is in chapter 12. It touches on health as a major component of wealth. And I feel like I hear a lot of financial professionals giving high-level lip service to this, but I don't know that much is happening beyond that. Do you ever think, I think we're seeing a broadening scope of the type of services advisors provide. I think that, as the financial side of the house gets more and more automated and more technologized, that I think the scope of what an advisor does will grow. Do you ever see a world in which financial advisors begin to take more of an active role in sort of talking about and monitoring health outcomes of their clients, or is that sort of beyond the pale?
No, so it's actually already starting to occur. So I will add maybe 3 or 4 things here that have occurred inside the Carson ecosystem. I do know one other advisor that does this too. We actually have a couple advisory practices that have brought in what I would say is strategic partners. I don't know, whatever you want to, that's way too much of a jargony term, but I'm just going to use that for now, that come in and help their clients. And actually, I do know one that has a doctor that is on call for their clients, and they actually will go and meet with them and do more health planning. So it's not like going to a physical. They actually work with them on kind of a health plan for their life, and that's wrapped into this planning fee that they pay. They have access to that and a couple other things. My guess is probably within the next 2 years, we will probably centralize more of that inside of Carson. Ron's really big on this. He's been talking about for a couple of years that concierge level kind of healthcare being wrapped into financial planning is so important. Yeah. And I know we have a mental health professional that is on essentially not on staff, but has a contract with us. And we have had that person meet with clients before, and we have had them meet with stakeholders. So we've wrapped that into the Carson Wealth side at Carson too. Now, those are, say, it's that's a very small percentage. We have 45,000 households we serve, and what is it, 100 probably have ever interacted with them. So we're talking about an infinitesimally small group that's actually seeing that. Now, if you take that one step further, we know that like workplace healthier clients that are less stressed or more productive, it's good for the business. There was a really, really good publication, and I drawn a blank on the name of the publication. I at least know who did it, but the Foundation for Financial Planning they helped sponsor a research project around blood cancer, and then people who got that pro bono financial planning and financial assistance, and the people who didn't, and it actually significantly changed the survivor rates of cancer. And I think it's like 18% higher survival chance if you have cancer, if you end up getting planning during that process and financial support. So it's kind of it's like a huge amount. I mean, it's literally like, if you think about how many people in the world have blood cancer of some type or cancer. And part of it is that financial stress of going bankrupt and running out of money and all those issues. Even if you have health insurance, it tends to deplete like half of the people's additional savings. And so having a plan in there literally can change lives. So if you think about the marrying of those two things, seems super important, that they shouldn't be siloed off from each other, because good planning will actually save people's lives. So if we have a good understanding of the health side and can put that into the planning side, and the more they can come together, literally people live better lives and longer. I mean, I don't know that you can come up with a better thing than that, right? It's like, that's the reason, right? Like, I don't know, like, insurance companies be like, oh, it saves premiums and it's less expensive. Like, cool. Like, those are nice benefits. This one keeps people alive that have cancer. Like, that seems pretty good. So that seems like a strong argument in favor of bringing these together over time.
These numbers, like, it almost seems like science fiction, but it's incredible how powerful the mind-body connection is, and how getting one part of your life right can materially improve seemingly disconnected other parts of your life. I really look forward to the day when financial advisors are sort of more of a quarterback for wellness broadly, understanding that money touches every part of wellness. And I think that's going to be, I think so many advisors are well positioned to step into that role. And I love to see, Carson and others in the industry headed that way. Jamie, my favorite book from a few years ago was called Lost Connections. And there's a quote that reminded me of one of your chapters, and it was the chapter on the power of community. So the quote was, "The internet was born into a world where many people had already lost their sense of connection to each other. The collapse had already been taking place for decades by then. The web arrived, offering them a kind of parody of what they were losing. Facebook friends in place of neighbors, video games in place of meaningful work, status updates in place of status in the world. The comedian Mark Maron once wrote that every status update is just a variation of a single request, would someone please acknowledge me?" So I absolutely love this book, if you can't tell. And it feels like we're living in a world where we are simultaneously better connected in some ways because of technology, or at least connection is facilitated. But also all of the research is showing that we're lonelier and lonelier, right? I mean, there was a study out this year that talked about the number of people whose friends had zero friends, like reported having zero friends, and it was a staggering number. And it was up like 30% from just a few years ago. Talk to us about the place of community in creating a life of financial wellness, and how people can be intentional about creating community in a disconnected world.
That's a big question there.
Well, that's the only kind we ask on the show.
Yeah. So like, I think community is incredibly important. And I mentioned this in Find Your Freedom, because one thing that community that I've realized does is shows people that they can accomplish something if they're worthy of accomplishing it. And sometimes I use it in a joking way, but usually you're in a community. And so we were talking about cancer already. So cancer survivors and people going through that, they see other people who survived, and it gives them the hope that they can also do it. And they say, Daniel did it, so I can do it. And it's like writing a book. You see somebody write a book, you say, you know what, I can do that too. In a running club, somebody runs a marathon, you realize that you then can do it too. So it gives people this hope that they can accomplish things that solo they otherwise might not believe that they can do. And so I think that's a super powerful part of community. Then along that way, you're going to run into hurdles where you're going to, question whether or not you could do something or whether you're worthy to do something. And that's where a really good community can come in and support you through that. And I do say a good community because in the book I talk about this, there are bad communities too. Typically we use that word community and everybody's like, hey, that's a great thing, your community. Well, there are negative communities too. And we end up in negative communities. And we end up in communities that might be bad for our finances or bad for our health. If you were in a fraternity and then stayed in that community for your whole life and you just kept going to, Rush every year and you're 65 years old, like that is probably bad for you, right? Like now I know there's going to be like, I was in a fraternity, so I'm not putting down that, but like there are aspects of that you shouldn't continue for your whole life, right? And if that community keeps you in that type of drinking to excess and staying out too late and eating poorly, that's a negative community. And we end up with purposeful and, I say accidental communities. You could say purposeful or unintentional, but I like that accidental. Like there's some that we fall into, there's some we're born into, there's some we can't change, right? Your family, you can't just remove that completely. You can mitigate it and move to the side of it, but there's still things that'll probably have impacted you from it. Yeah. And, but I think it's important to challenge ourselves or like, what are good communities that we're in and what are negative communities? And then if you want to accomplish something, find the community that could help get you there. Now, to the other point you asked, which was, how do we foster this sense of community? And I actually agree. I think community is getting harder today. My assumption is a lot of stuff has a pendulum swing, that things go back and forth, that some communities get stronger, some get weaker over time. I'm sure that there's some other point in history that two people are sitting around being like, oh man, the community has really gone away here. And like, then it came back. But I think we're going through one of those transitions, at least in the United States. I don't know about every country, because we see that loneliness and disconnected. And you can see it in like the trade associations out there in the world too, that they're all shrinking. And it's not just like financial services, it's legal, it's, CPAs, like they're all getting smaller. And they're kind of going away, right? There's a lot. I mean, I don't know the number that have gone away, but they're disappearing. And those, their foundation were just communities of people that got together. Some of that's moved online. I think FinTwit for a while was a really interesting community. I know you've been part of that, and I've met a lot of great people from there. That'll probably move someday to some other platform, whether it's a TikTok community. One day, it will shift. And so I think finding your place there. And then I also talk about like, what role do you want to play in a community, right? Like you can also play a role in a community where you're bringing and connecting others to it, or you can be the one that's being connected to, right? You could be a driver of the community. You can be a follower in the community, and you can actually determine some of those roles. Like, how do you want to play in community? And that's something that I've shifted. For a while, I always was just looking for what community did I feel like I wanted to belong to. And probably a little bit like you, we now have the ability to shape some of these communities and we can bring people into them, right? Like, that's part of like the privilege of, having some career success, at least in the eyes of others, and having been around now for some time and know people and been part of the community, is that we can also form some of it. And I think more about that now. Is like, what is my role in the formation of this? So, I launched the nonprofit like 2 years ago, FinServe Foundation. And just this week, I know some of the numbers, but we have put like 110 college students into that scholarship program inside of FinServe that now get coaching. And we have taken 81 students to 3 different